The void was silent until the first explosions lit up the stars. The Empire's fleet had come in strength, their banners stretching across the system like a tide no world could resist. Dozens of warships, bristling with weapons that had ended civilizations, closed in on a single fragile planet. Earth was supposed to kneel. Humanity was supposed to break. And yet, something stirred. Buried beneath the ice of a forgotten moon, where even Earth's own people had almost erased its existence, a prototype awakened. Metal groaned, reactors rumbled, and a vessel older than the Empire itself rose from its tomb. The invaders didn't understand what they were seeing, until it fired. In a single blast, ships that had once terrorized galaxies were reduced to wreckage. Fear spread faster than fire, because for the first time in centuries, the Empire realized something terrible. Earth had not forgotten everything, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Adrian Holt never thought he would be the one to touch the stars. Born in the gray sprawl of Earth's recovering cities, he was a child of the Reclamation era, when humanity had begun piecing itself back together after centuries of wars, collapses, and silence. Earth was scarred, yet alive. The oceans were darker, the skies heavier, but people worked with their hands and their hearts to build something worth protecting. Adrian had grown up hearing stories of forgotten projects, half-mythical weapons and technologies buried when humanity feared itself more than any outside power. But like most children, he dismissed them as bedtime tales meant to stir wonder. As he grew, the stories faded, replaced with the weight of real duties. Now, as an engineer for the Orbital Salvage Corps, Adrian spent his days among rusted satellites, broken frigates, and dead stations circling Earth. It was honest work. Dangerous, thankless, but vital. Humanity couldn't afford to waste anything anymore. Not fuel, not steel, not history. He liked the silence of orbit. Out here, no one cared about the fractured governments below, or the faint threats whispered from beyond human space. Out here, you just had to keep your suit sealed, your tools steady, and your nerves calmer than the black that pressed in all around you. Yet even in that silence, he had begun to notice things. Wreckage that shouldn't have been there. Signal fragments that spoke in languages no human tongue had shaped. Patterns of movement that suggested unseen watchers. Reports of missing ships, hushed before they reached the news channels. The Empire had not yet revealed itself, but its shadow was stretching closer. Adrian didn't know that. Not fully. But he felt it, the way a man senses a storm in the pressure of the air before clouds gather. Something was coming. Something vast. And when it came, Earth would not be ready. That night, when he returned from orbit to the cluttered comfort of his small apartment in New London, Adrian did what he always did, called his sister. She teased him about working in the cold vacuum for scrap pay, told him she was still waiting for him to fix their father's old guitar, and asked when he was finally going to take a day off. Ordinary talk. The kind of talk that made the dangers of space seem distant. But halfway through the call, the screen flickered. Military override. A symbol Adrian hadn't seen in his lifetime, only in archived hollows, appeared. The seal of the Terran Defense Directorate. His heart froze. That agency had been dissolved generations ago. Then came the voice, measured, cold, official. All orbital salvage engineers are ordered to report to lunar dockyards immediately. You are being reassigned. Adrian's sister's face vanished, replaced by the directive. And then, just before the feed cut, 3 words crawled across the screen like a ghost returning from the grave. Project Goliath. Reactivation order. He sat in silence, staring, pulse hammering in his ears. Goliath. He remembered that name from the old bedtime stories. Earth's prototype. The warship built not for deterrence, not for peace, but for annihilation. A weapon so dangerous humanity had buried it, sworn it would never be used. But if they were bringing it back now, then the stories hadn't been myths. And that could only mean one thing. Something was coming for Earth. And Adrian Holt, scrap engineer, dreamer, child of a fragile world, was about to be caught in the heart of it. The shuttle ride to the lunar dockyards was unlike any Adrian had ever taken. No casual chatter from the crew, no easy laughter to dull the endless black outside the windows. Everyone aboard sat rigid, silent, eyes locked on the glowing directive scrolling across the bulkhead. Adrian's thoughts churned. The old stories had painted Goliath as a monster wrapped in steel, a warship so far ahead of its time that Earth itself had feared unleashing it. His father used to whisper of it when blackout storms cut power from their city. A ship built in the last days of the old conflicts, designed to end wars with a single strike, then sealed away, entombed in the dark when peace demanded fear be buried. But the Directorate had revived it. Why now? The answer came the moment they disembarked. The lunar dockyards were not the bustling, half-forgotten husks Adrian remembered from salvage runs. Now they burned with life. Barracks filled, hangars roared with engines, soldiers marched in silence. And orbit above the gray horizon, he saw them. Alien warships, dozens, sleek, spined silhouettes that blotted out stars. The Empire had arrived. Adrian followed a group of conscripted engineers down a corridor into the heart of the facility. The walls vibrated faintly, humming with reactor cores and heavy machinery. His badge was scanned, his tools confiscated, and his name added to a roster older than he was. When they finally opened the blast doors to the central chamber, Adrian's breath caught. There it was, suspended in the cavernous dock, armored hull bathed in floodlight, lay Goliath. It wasn't sleek like the alien craft. It was brutal, angular. Every surface looked like it had been designed to absorb punishment and return it tenfold. Its guns were massive, its armor plated like the hide of some iron beast. At its core glowed a reactor chamber so large it seemed to bend the very air with its heat. But most terrifying was the silence it radiated. This was no ordinary ship. This was a weapon, built for a war humanity had sworn never to fight again. "Welcome to the tomb," a voice said beside him. Adrian turned. A woman stood there, her uniform sharp, her expression harder than steel. Commander Mara Vey. He knew the name. One of the last surviving tacticians trained under the Directorate's war colleges, a ghost from history, alive in flesh. "You're here because this relic needs hands," she said, eyes never leaving the warship. "It's been sleeping for 2 centuries. And we don't have the luxury of time. The Empire is already in orbit. If we fail to wake her, Earth falls." Adrian swallowed hard. "Why me?" "Because you've been crawling through wreckage your whole life," Mara said. "You understand machines that should be dead. Now prove humanity's not." The following days blurred into endless hours of sweat, sparks, and exhaustion. Adrian and dozens of other engineers worked like their veins pumped pure adrenaline. Systems dormant for centuries had to be coaxed alive, their language half forgotten. Circuits crumbled under touch, coolant lines ruptured, entire decks had to be welded back into integrity. All while the Empire tightened its grip. Every hour, another human relay fell. Fleets scrambled and vanished. Civilian transports fleeing outer colonies went dark. Broadcasts screamed before cutting to static. And from lunar orbit, they could see the alien warships circling, patient as predators, waiting for Earth to gasp its last breath. But in the dock, something else stirred. One by one, Goliath's systems flared awake. Her reactor pulsed, her weapons arrays unlocked. Deep within her armored heart, a core hummed with power no engineer could explain, an energy source older than the Empire itself. and Adrian was there for every heartbeat. He watched as Mara stood on the command dais, issuing orders with clipped precision. He watched as crew who had never flown anything larger than a cargo hauler strapped themselves into stations older than their great-grandparents. And he felt it, that slow, rising awe, that maybe, just maybe, humanity had teeth sharper than anyone remembered. The warning came 3 nights later. "They're mobilizing!" Adrian looked up from a console, sweat stinging his eyes. On the main holoscreen, alien formations shifted. The Empire's fleet no longer orbited passively. It descended. Mara's voice carried through the chamber like steel drawn from its sheath. "Prepare for engagement!" We launch now. The dock shook as clamps disengaged. Floodlights died. Alarms blared. And then, silence, as Goliath moved under her own power for the first time in centuries. Adrian pressed his face to the viewport. The void stretched out before them, vast and terrible. The alien ships gleamed with cold menace, their formation closing like a fist around Earth. For a heartbeat, Adrian felt the hopelessness of it. Humanity had never stood against a fleet this size. Every battle before this had ended in slaughter. What chance did one half-rusted relic have? Then the ship's systems roared online, and the doubt in his chest burned away. Goliath was awake. The Empire opened fire first. Bolts of plasma streaked through the void, carving molten scars into the dockyards they had just left. Civilian habitats shattered. The black filled with fire. Mara didn't flinch. "Target locks. Prioritize their carriers." The deck thrummed. Goliath's cannons rotated, groaning like ancient gods roused from slumber. Then they fired. Adrian staggered as a beam of light brighter than the sun carved across the void. It lanced through 3 alien ships in a single stroke, tearing them open like paper. No plasma, no missile. Something older, stranger. The kind of weapon humans had buried because it frightened even them. The comms erupted with alien chatter, panicked, disbelieving. The Empire had faced resistance before, but never like this. And still, they advanced. Dozens of ships broke formation, circling, firing in torrents. Shields flickered, hull plating buckled. Goliath groaned with the weight of centuries. But she held. "Engineering," Mara barked. "Status?" Adrian's hands flew over consoles. "Reactor stable, barely. Rerouting coolant to forward arrays. Do it." He did. And the ship answered. Another blast, tearing through the void, scattering enemy fighters like dust. For the first time in living memory, humanity was not prey. Hours passed in a blur of fire and silence, light and shadow. Adrian lost count of the ships burning in Goliath's wake. But the Empire was endless. For every warship shattered, another pressed forward. At last, Mara's voice cut through the storm. Calm. Deadly. "They'll adapt. They always do. We need to end this before they surround us." Adrian looked at her, breath ragged. "End it how?" She met his eyes. "By using what they buried her for." She entered commands locked behind encryption older than Earth's governments. The ship shuddered as systems no human hand had touched in 2 centuries roared awake. Deep beneath its armored hull, something stirred, something that hummed with impossible energy. "What is it?" Adrian whispered. Mara's gaze didn't waver. "The reason they entombed her." A weapon too terrible to use. Until today. The deck lights dimmed. The reactor howled. The alien fleet shifted nervously, as if they sensed what was coming. Adrian gripped the railing, heart pounding. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was the moment humanity showed the galaxy what they had tried so hard to forget. Outside, the Empire's warships formed into a killing ring, energy weapons converging on the lone Terran ship. The stars burned with their fury. Inside, Goliath's core flared like a second sun. Adrian felt the air tremble, the ship itself alive with power older than empires, more terrible than anything he had imagined. And then, just as the enemy unleashed everything they had, Mara whispered the order. Fire. The void itself seemed to tear open. What came next would decide not just Earth's fate, but the galaxy's. The alien fleet closed in, a storm of fire and steel. Every gun, every weapon, every ounce of hatred the Empire had ever hurled at a resisting world now turned toward a single target, one human warship that should not have existed. The void erupted with light. Plasma lances carved through the dark, missiles streaked. Energy beams hammered Goliath's shields until the ship shuddered and groaned like a beast refusing the leash. Alarms screamed, bulkheads shook. Crew braced as though the universe itself was trying to crush them. Adrian clung to his station, fingers bleeding as sparks showered across the consoles. Numbers screamed in red, shields at 43%. Hull integrity compromised. Casualties reported. He thought of his sister, of Earth below, a fragile blue orb hanging against the abyss. If they failed, there would be nothing left but ash. Mara stood tall on the command dais, unflinching in the storm. Hold the line, she said, voice steady as bedrock. Goliath was built for this. But Adrian could see the truth in the data flashing before him. They couldn't withstand this forever. The Empire's fleet was too vast, too relentless. Even this forgotten titan would break under the onslaught. Unless they unleashed the weapon. The weapon buried for centuries. The weapon humanity had sworn would never see the light again. Core at full charge, Adrian gasped, his voice shaking. Whatever it is, it's ready. Mara's gaze hardened. She had been trained for war her whole life, but even she hesitated. Once they crossed this line, there was no turning back. Adrian whispered, almost to himself, if we don't, Earth dies. The words hung there, fragile but undeniable. Mara gave the order, fire the primary. The ship's heart roared. Lights dimmed. The air itself felt heavy, charged with impossible energy. Then Goliath unleashed her true voice. It wasn't a beam, not in any sense the galaxy understood. It was a wound in space itself, a tearing of reality that spat fury older than stars. The blast cut across the void in a sweeping arc, erasing everything in its path. Alien warships, shields raised, weapons primed, formations perfect, ceased to exist in the blink of an eye. One strike. Dozens of ships reduced to drifting embers. Adrian's chest seized. He had never seen such power. No one had. The comms lit up with panicked alien voices, their confidence shattering into disbelief. The Empire had conquered galaxies, enslaved worlds, bent civilizations to their will. They had never known fear. Until now. And yet, even in their terror, they pressed forward. The survivors regrouped, desperate to overwhelm the lone Terran dreadnought before it could fire again. Mara's eyes narrowed. Charge the core. Prepare another volley. The deck trembled violently as return fire battered their hull. A support strut collapsed, crushing 2 crew before medics could pull them free. Flames erupted from the starboard conduits. Goliath bled, but still she endured. Adrian's hands raced. Coolant surged. Power rerouted. Systems jury-rigged in ways no engineer manual would ever approve. His knuckles split against sharp edges. His lungs filled with smoke, but he kept working. Reactor at 72%, he shouted. Not enough, Mara replied. We need full charge. We won't survive long enough. Mara turned to him, eyes blazing. Then make us survive. And he did. He rerouted shield grids through redundant salvage conduits. He sacrificed secondary weapons to keep the core stable. He gambled everything, praying that ingenuity could do what brute force could not. The crew fought with the same desperation. A navigator pulled them through gaps between plasma storms by instinct alone. A gunnery officer fired blind salvos that bought precious seconds. Every human aboard poured their soul into defiance. They weren't just holding the line. They were daring the galaxy to break them. At last, the reactor screamed with full charge. The ship groaned like a beast on the edge of fury. "Primary ready!" Adrian gasped, throat raw. Mara raised her hand. Time seemed to stop. Every eye turned to her, every breath caught in lungs filled with ash and hope. "Now," she whispered. Goliath roared again. The second blast was worse than the first. A tide of light swept across the void, annihilating the Empire's Central Command ships. Their admiral's flagship shattered, consumed in fire so pure it erased even the screams on the comms. The invincible Empire broke. Adrian stared in awe as the survivors scattered, their once perfect discipline crumbling into chaos. Dozens fled into the void, engines blazing. The rest lay in ruin, debris fields drifting like tombstones around the moon. For the first time in living memory, the Empire had been defeated. Not by an armada, not by an alliance, by Earth, by a single forgotten warship. But victory came at a price. The deck was strewn with wounded, smoke choked the air. Systems sparked and failed. Adrian's console flickered, bleeding warnings. Hull breaches spread across 3 decks. Their ship had survived, but barely. And the core wasn't stable. "Reactor's burning itself out," Adrian warned, voice hoarse. "We can't hold this power much longer." Mara looked around at her battered crew, at the blood, the exhaustion, the quiet resolve. She understood what had been won, but also what had been unleashed. The galaxy would never be the same. Outside the viewport, Earth gleamed, fragile and beautiful. Humanity's cradle, still alive, still free. Adrian felt tears burn his eyes. Against all odds, they had survived. But as he looked upon the wreckage of the Empire's fleet, a thought chilled him more than the void itself. If this was just the beginning, if one forgotten prototype could do this, what else had Earth buried? And what would happen when the galaxy realized humanity was remembering? The battle was over, but the silence that followed was heavier than the war itself. Where once 1,000 alien warships had darkened the void, now there were only drifting husks, broken, burning, and silent. Their lights flickering like dying embers scattered across the black sea of space. The void smelled of ozone and ash, though in truth it was only the scent of scorched steel filtering through Orion's damaged ventilation system. Captain Elias Orion stood on the bridge, his uniform torn, his hands blackened by smoke and blood. The forgotten prototype warship, Leviathan, floated scarred yet alive, her hull pitted with craters, her engines coughing sparks, but her core blazing strong. The crew stared at him, at the ship, at the impossible victory they had just witnessed. "They're gone," whispered Lieutenant Vale, her voice trembling between awe and disbelief. "The Empire's fleet, it's gone." For a long moment, no one spoke. No one could. The human crew, battle-worn and broken, stared at the screens where the remains of their enemy drifted lifeless in the void. And then, slowly, applause began. Not loud, not raucous, just a ripple, a murmur of hands meeting, of hearts daring to believe. Elias didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He only let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Humanity had not been erased today. It had endured. News traveled faster than light, carried on whispers, on intercepted signals, on the raw shock of disbelief across the stars. The humans live. Their forgotten warship destroyed the Empire's fleet. The prey fought back and won. Across the galaxy, silence fell in alien war councils. Some dismissed it as propaganda. Others trembled, recalling the old stories, the warnings that humanity was not like the others, that beneath their fragile skin and soft hearts burned something unbreakable. On distant colonies where humans huddled under oppression, children looked up at the stars and smiled for the first time in years. Shackled workers whispered the name Leviathan like a prayer. Soldiers of other oppressed worlds began to wonder, if humanity could defy the impossible, why couldn't they? The galaxy had witnessed an extinction that never came, and now they had to face what came next. On the Leviathan's bridge, Elias finally sat. His body ached with exhaustion, but his eyes lingered on the wreckage beyond the viewport. "We've shown them," he murmured, more to himself than the crew. "Shown them what happens when humanity is cornered." Vale turned toward him, her eyes burning. "Captain, what now?" "We've woken the galaxy. They'll fear us now more than ever." He looked at her, and then at the surviving faces of his crew. Each one of them had risked everything. Each one had carried humanity on their shoulders when no one else would. "What now?" Elias repeated, his voice steady, resolute. "Now, they remember who we are." His words hung in the air like a promise. The galaxy would remember this day. They would remember the prototype warship, long abandoned, resurrected by desperate hands. They would remember the humans who refused to bow, who turned forgotten steel into vengeance, who fought against an empire that had crushed countless civilizations and yet lost. But more than that, they would remember the truth carved into the void with fire and blood, that humans were not prey, that humans did not surrender, that humanity endured. And as the stars burned on in eternal silence, one thought spread like wildfire across 1,000 worlds. If this was what humanity could do with one forgotten prototype, what would happen when the rest of their kind rose again? The Leviathan drifted onward, scarred but unbroken, her engines pushing toward the unknown.